Joining us now from CBS Sports is Garrett Podell, the NFL staff writer. Hi, Garrett. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. I wanted to ask you, I want to go back just for a minute to the Super Bowl because we saw how dominant Philly was. When you walked away from that, and you obviously knew how Philly did it and you saw it, what most did you think about Kansas City in terms of how they played and what they must change maybe to get back there and to perform better? What takes did you take from the Chiefs? Because we know what the Eagles did.
Right, and what the Eagles did is they got home with their front four defensive linemen over and over and over again. They didn't blitz, and they played zone coverage, I think, on all but two of the Chiefs' offensive snaps, so what that says to me is they assumed arrogantly and correctly that their defensive line was so much better than the Chiefs' offensive line that if they just made Mahomes think for even a split second, not let him just identify, okay, there's an open man who beat his man, I'm going to hit him, that would be enough time for their defensive line to harass Mahomes over and over again, and they were correct. So I think what I learned about the Chiefs is their offense, they have a lot of work to do in that department in terms of upgrading it. I think at their offensive tackle position, you look at someone like Jawan Taylor, their right tackle, they signed to a pretty big deal a few years ago. I think it was 4 years, around $80 million. I mean, that guy is one of the most penalized offensive linemen in the league since he joined the Chiefs. I mean, that right tackle spot is an issue. And honestly, left tackle is too. I know they had all-pro lineman Joe Thuney out there at left tackle for that game, but he's really a left guard. That's the position that he's played for the bulk of his career. He's been an interior offensive lineman, and so he was kind of pressed into duty out there. So if I'm the Chiefs, I'm looking at both of my tackle spots, and Trey Smith, their right guard, who might be arguably the most coveted offensive lineman on the free agency market this year, he might be gone. So you're looking at 3 spots on the Chiefs' offensive line you have to retool. And then if you look at his receiving core, Travis Kelce's 35 years old. He's got 1 year left on his current contract if he decides to play in 2025. And then the rest of his wide receivers with Rashee Rice hurt just didn't get the job done. I know Xavier Worthy's stat line at the end of the game looked really cool, and he had over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. But entering the fourth quarter, I think he had under 40 receiving yards. I mean, he's a rookie, so it's not totally fair to come down too hard on him. But Juju Smith-Schuster in 2025, and DeAndre Hopkins in 2025, Marquise Hollywood Brown coming off a shoulder injury that really zapped his entire regular season from him. That just wasn't a good enough supporting cast for Mahomes. And so the O-line and receiving core, I think, need total overhauls. Their defense throughout the course of the season and the playoffs was pretty good, but it's hard to play defense when your offense can't stay on the field and throws picks inside their own 20.
As you look at how this offseason has shaped up so far, what do you think has been the best coaching hire that you've seen, and are there any that you're not so sure about?
I mean, the best coaching hire for me has to be Ben Johnson going to the Chicago Bears. I know that's like a layup to say, right? He's the most coveted candidate, and the Detroit Lions are the highest scoring offense in football since he was their OC in 2022. But I think they really needed to get that hire right because they have Caleb Williams, who they invested in the number 1 overall pick in a year ago. You need to get the right coach in there who can maximize that pick and that player. And from what we saw from him in college, and even in glimpses this year, that he has the ability to be special. So I like that hire, that they just went and got the best dude available. I like Liam Cohen for the Jacksonville Jaguars for a similar reason, because Trevor Lawrence is somebody who it's kind of been up and down. 2022 was a really great year, but then injuries and kind of a vanilla offensive scheme and kind of derailed him the last couple of years. So I really like Cohen and Johnson for 2 franchises that got coaches who should be able to maximize what their quarterbacks have. One I was really scratching my head about, and then I'm kind of in wait-and-see mode, is I'm here in Dallas covering the Cowboys a lot, and I was actually at the facility yesterday meeting their assistant coaches, is Brian Schottenheimer, just because 25 years as an NFL assistant, no other team had reached out to interview him to be their head coach, and Jerry Jones tapped him to be the head coach after he was the offensive coordinator for Mike McCarthy the last 2 years, did not call the plays. McCarthy called the plays. And so it's very rare just in sports in general, whether it's football, basketball, any sport, where the head coach and a team part ways, and then the team decides, okay, we're going to promote that outgoing coach who we let go, their top assistant, who wasn't even in the football context calling plays. So, I'm entering it with an open mind because I've gotten to know him the last couple of years. He's a really nice guy. And when you ask him any question about like a scheme thing or why something's working, he really gives you an elaborate answer. So you really feel like you understand what's going on when you're looking to report on something. But Brian Schottenheimer is definitely somebody who I think everyone would like to see. How's this going to look?
He's 72. Pete Carroll gets the job in Las Vegas. People are assuming Brady's kind of running the show anyway. John Spytek comes in as the new GM. And I think it's assumed around here, at least, that Pete Carroll is going to bring some semblance of stability, professionalism to an organization that has needed it in the past. What did you think of this? Are you okay with 72? Are you okay with Pete Carroll coming back?
Yeah, well, actually, he's 73, and he'll be 74. By the time the season starts, which will make him the oldest NFL head coach ever at the time that he actually begins coaching them in the regular season. I'm okay with it, to be honest with you, because I've not had the chance to personally interact with Pete Carroll, but watching him on TV in press conferences, I mean, he may be going on 74, but he's energetic than a lot more energetic than a lot of people who are younger than him. He has a rare energy to him. And I think there is something to be said about stability, right? Because just a few years ago, there was kind of the uneven tenure of Josh McDaniels. And then you go to Antonio Pierce, and he was one and done, which I didn't necessarily think was fair to only give Antonio Pierce 1 year, but it is what it is. Now he's out, and Pete Carroll's in. But I do think I like the hire for stability. They signed him to, I think it was a 3-year guaranteed contract with like an option for a 4th year. And I like kind of getting somebody in there who is known to be this culture builder and somebody who's a proven winner. I think the organization kind of needed a head coach that everyone in the building truly respected, and he provides that. Now, it'll be really interesting because I can say all these nice things about Pete Carroll, but he didn't truly win big until he had Russell Wilson playing top-notch football and while simultaneously having a top 10 defense. So in terms of the quarterback department, there's work to be done in Las Vegas, I'm sure, as you guys all know, being on the ground there.
Garrett, you mentioned being on the ground in Dallas and covering the Cowboys. We're now at the very well-documented 30-year mark on NFC Championship droughts for the Cowboys. How do you feel that this team can get back to, I don't want to say relevance because they're always relevant. They're the Cowboys. But how can they get back to being a serious contender year in and year out?
That's a great question. And the simple answer is it starts at the top with Jerry and Stephen Jones, because the Cowboys are a good organization for the most part when it comes to evaluating talent in the draft and finding high caliber players. Over the years, I mean, you look at their roster, I mean, it's still a lot of the same guys, but when they won 12 games in a row in the regular season from 2021 to 2023, they had all these Pro Bowlers and all pros, and most of them were players they had drafted. But where they really struggle is the second contract, when to extend guys, and how to do it in a way to maximize the salary cap space. And that comes down to, for whatever reason, they don't feel comfortable a lot of times pulling the trigger on some of these bigger extensions for their star players. You look at Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb last offseason. Dak was signed hours before kickoff in Week 1 against the Cleveland Browns, and CeeDee Lamb wasn't signed until after the bulk of their training camp in Oxnard, California was concluded. And by doing so and waiting that long, they had to pay top-of-the-market money. I mean, Dak Prescott, his $60 million average per year salary is the highest in the NFL. And all that could have been avoided if they had just decided to pull the trigger earlier, sign guys maybe a couple years before they're up for new deals, and then structure them and backload them so that they can have more money to operate in the now. Because I think even though they're the richest NFL franchise, they operate like a franchise when it comes to giving out the contracts and pushing money down the road that has very little money, despite every year Forbes says they're the most valuable sports team on the planet. So I think it has to come from the top, and I look no further than their NFC East rival, the Eagles, who just won the Super Bowl, right? I wrote an article after Stephen Jones said at Schottenheimer's press conference that they were going to reevaluate how they approach free agency. Well, last year, they spent the lowest amount of money in the entire NFL in free agency, and a lot of that comes down to the poor salary cap management. The Eagles have 8 players whose total value on their contracts is above $50 million, and then 6 of those guys, their average per year salary on their contract is above $20 million. The Cowboys only have 4 players who have contracts that the total value is over $50 million, and only two of those guys, Dak and CD, are guys whose average per year salary is higher than $20 million. But you know what's crazy about that? So I just laid that out for you. The Eagles are entering the offseason with more cap space than the Cowboys, which that doesn't seem possible. But how it's possible is the Eagles, they sign their guys 2-3 years, right when they're extension eligible to deals. They push money out into the future. And then because of those cap savings, they're unafraid with the salary cap continuing to go up with the new league TV deal that was signed a few years ago. And they get guys in free agency. They signed Saquon Barkley, and that put them over the top. So I would say it has to come from a roster and contract management perspective. And so it'll be interesting to see if Jerry and Stephen Jones ever decide to change their ways, because that's really only when real change is going to happen.
Garrett, finally, I want to ask you a question real quick. Does Aaron Rodgers play, and what kind of team would take him?
I think he will play. He's such a prideful guy, and he's one of the top 5 quarterbacks in league history in terms of touchdown passes, including he only needs 6 more touchdown passes to pass Brett Favre on the all-time passing touchdown list, which for somebody who never forgets a grudge and is known to be a little petty, that feels like something that means something to Aaron Rodgers, passing Brett Favre on the all-time touchdowns list. In terms of the type of team that would get him, look, I wrote an Aaron Rodgers landing spots article, and I think it's a team that is needing quarterback stability. I mean, it's a short-term setup. He's 41 years old, that needs it right now and doesn't really have a direct avenue in the draft to go get a quarterback, and doesn't trust that Sam Darnold and paying him a bunch of money over multiple years in free agency is the right move. So, I mean, you could look at a place like the Pittsburgh Steelers, where Mike Tomlin's under fire, and his defense is typically a top 10 defense, but they just can't get the quarterback position correct. If you're the Minnesota Vikings and you don't want to pay Sam Darnold, and you just want J.J. McCarthy coming off that meniscus tear to sit for one more year and really get healthy, maybe it's a place like Minnesota. Or even maybe the Raiders. I mean, you guys have the 6th overall draft pick in a quarterback class that, after the top 2 guys in Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders, I mean, it takes a big plunge. On CBSSports.com, we have Jalen Milroe as our 3rd highest rated quarterback prospect in this class. But his prospect ranking overall, according to our site, is 45th in the draft. So that's not a first-round pick, and that's a project. So, maybe a team that's just looking for a stopgap for a year and doesn't immediately have the resources to go get a guy now.
Well, he is Garrett Podell from CBS Sports, doing an incredible job there as the NFL staff writer. Garrett, we appreciate the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to join and talk ball anytime.
Take care of yourself. Garrett Podell from CBS Sports.